Hi, everybody. Just going to, well, very welcome. I'm just going to give people a few more moments to join us. People usually leaving one meeting, going straight into the next. So while I'm doing that, just to introduce myself, I'm Carolyn Wilkinson. I'm chair of CLES, and I'll sort of be holding the ring and sort of hosting this session that we've got with you, but delighted to have you joining us. And we've also got Tom Lloyd Goodwin, who's Director of Policy and Practice at CLES, and very pleased to have Michael Wood from Health Economic Partnerships from the NHS Confed with us as well this afternoon. So I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping while everybody's kind of settling in, and just to I'll run through the order of the session, but you should have also received a copy of the paper that was sent to you this morning. So and I think we're also going to put the link in the chat for those of you that haven't had a chance to read it yet. I would imagine it only came out this morning, but we'll put the link through as well. I'm going to talk through it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hand over in a moment after doing a bit of an introduction to Tom, who's going to kind of run through some of the key insights from the work that have been done on this agenda, and then going to hand over to Michael in terms of a response, and then we're just going to have a conversation. While that's happening, if you'd like to put any questions that you've got in the Q&A box, we'll be keeping an eye on that as well, because at the final part of the session, we'll do a Q&A session. So you can also, I'm sure people are very familiar with this now, but you can also upvote other people's questions. So if you see something you think, yeah, that's the one we'd really like to explore, vote it up, and then we'll make sure that we cover that one. Okay. So that's the plan for the next hour that we've got together. So just a few words from me by way of intro. So CLES obviously have been key advocates for community wealth building for many years now, over 2 decades actually. And I think I've kind of been alongside that for most of that journey. Specific focus actually recently about the NHS and the role that can play in social and economic development since 2018. Did some work with the Health Foundation about anchor institutions, particularly the role of the NHS as an anchor institution, which was picked up actually in the long-term plan. Not necessarily at the beginning of the document, but actually it was included. And since then, obviously, there have been significant changes in the structure of the NHS with the introduction of integrated care systems, with their 4 key aims, one of which is very explicitly to support the broader social economic development of places. And that alongside the pandemic, which alongside many other things, really did highlight for us all the depth and breadth of inequalities and the challenge that's facing us, but also the importance of communities and the importance of local infrastructure. So the research that's been carried out has really been looking at how the NHS could make use of its wider assets to improve the local social and economic conditions in these times of really constrained resources. You know, how do we get absolutely the maximum impact from every resource that we've got is the challenge, I think, facing all of us to contribute to population health, reduction of inequalities. So looking particularly, and Tom will expand on this more, but how does the NHS spend its money on goods and services? Who does it employ? How do people access employment opportunities in the NHS? And the use of land as well, and any other resources that we've got. So, and there's a number of recommendations in the report about best practice, because they've been really informed actually by a specific piece of work that we've been commissioned to do by the Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes ICS, looking at an action plan. So really translating these ideas and theories into practical action. So that's what we're going to explore in more detail this afternoon. So thrilled that you're with us. And with no further ado, I'll hand over to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. And good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. So I think I'm going to give an overview of this paper then. So it kind of, right from the top, it brings together then that knowledge and experience that we've accumulated over recent years and kind of historically with our work on community wealth building to really provide a high-level blueprint then for ICSs to look at how they can use their heft as anchor institutions to contribute to social and economic development, which, as Carolyn said, of course, is one of the new objectives within ICSs. And what I'll do then over the next 10 minutes is just to give A bit of a brief overview of the paper. I'll talk about anchors, I'll talk about community wealth building, and I'll talk about the opportunity that I think the NHS now has, particularly in this space. So I'll go through the recommendations, what this means for both practice on the ground, as well as what we need from national policymakers to really help push this agenda even further. And I'll also flag various case studies that are presented in the report too. So let me start with the kind of context and framing then for this work. As we say right up front in the report, the NHS has got a key role to play, not just in treating us, but in ensuring that we don't fall ill in the first place. And as we explain, one of the fundamental ways in which it can do this is by using what we might call its place-based assets in a more considered way to impact on the social determinants of health. Now, I'll come on to what that means in practice in a moment, but as a tactic, really, this is about the NHS and its partners, as I say, fulfilling their responsibilities as a series of anchor institutions. So anchors, if you're not familiar with the term, I'm sure probably all of you are, but let me just kind of recap. They're organizations with sizable presence and heft within the local economy that can generate positive impacts for people, for place, and for planet. And they do this by using their spending power, their employment capacity, and then their real assets, such as facilities and land, to really start to affect the social, economic, and environmental well-being of places and localities that they operate within. And then used in the right way, then, these place-based assets are an essential component of what we at CLES refer to as a community wealth building agenda, and what many of you know about that as well. And this continues to advance across the UK, particularly in Scotland, actually, where, of course, it forms part of the programme for government there. It's supported by new legislation that's going through Parliament. But what community wealth building offers in a nutshell is an alternative form of economic development that's about using collective economic, social, and environmental power that anchors have within them to drive a more equitable and sustainable form of economic activity in place. So it's about democratizing our economy so that wealth and opportunity is widespread as opposed to being narrowly held. So this is about harnessing that collective spending power that anchors have to grow more socially productive SMEs, more triple bottom line SMEs, more cooperatives, more social enterprises, more community businesses. It's about targeting those significant employment opportunities that anchors have towards people and communities who need those opportunities the most. And then it's about using surplus land to provide affordable housing or support for locally owned enterprise. And I suppose it's, community wealth building as a theory and a practice is an antidote, really, if you will, to traditional forms of economic development, which sees wealth and opportunity extracted out of our local economies to serve often distant shareholders and interests, and where economic growth and activity continues to rise, but so does poverty, deprivation, and ill health. But of course, it doesn't have to be this way. And where places have committed to making community wealth building the cornerstone of their economic strategy, we're seeing the tide starting to turn. Now, in terms of the impact that this is having, CLES are currently co-investigators on an NIHR, so National Institute for Health research study. That's with colleagues at University of Liverpool, so Ben Barr and his team there, also UCLan, and University of Lancaster too. And we're looking at the health and well-being impacts of the community wealth building interventions that have been used for a number of years now in Preston. And what we found in Preston compared to 12 other match control areas is improvements in mental health, improvements in life satisfaction, and in wages too. And so these findings have been peer reviewed. They've been published in the Lancet Journal of Public Health. I've just written an article about that in the MJ, the Municipal Journal for Local Authority Business, and we'll circulate those pieces in the chat now for you to have a look at. But the opportunity that, the reason this is so important, that I think there's a particular opportunity now within ICSs, with the emergence of ICSs, we've kind of got a perfect forum to bring all of this together. So typically ICSs create networks of several large anchor institutions, so particularly those provider trusts and local councils, which of course collectively spend billions of pounds, they employ thousands of people, and they hold other significant assets such as land. ICSs, as we know, as Carolyn mentioned, as I mentioned, they've got this objective, and you know this, of course, this objective to support social and economic development, and they're responsible for population health. With community wealth building, with good anchor practice, what we've got is a strategy for economic and social development, which is health creating. So it's a no-brainer, really. This should be the key strategic aim for all ICSs when it comes to social and economic development. And surprise, surprise, that's why this is the first recommendation within the report. You know, look no further. Community wealth building, good anchor practice is the solution you need to support social and economic development. But then, of course, we get into, well, practically, what do we do on the ground? And that's what the rest of the recommendations in our new report cover. Along with, well, what could the Department of Health, what could NHS England do more to give NHS more freedom here? Because, you know, as we explain in the report, and as I'll mention in a moment, it is somewhat constricted here. So in the main, our recommendations cover spending, they cover employment, they cover land. So let me just briefly take each of those in turn. So with spending, then, this is about the NHS working with economic development teams in local councils, encourage more living wage employment, and encourage the reduction of carbon emissions. Now, as we say in the report, there's some potential quick wins here in terms of routing some of that non-NHS supply chain expenditure into the local economy. As we flag in the report, we're seeing this in practice already. So Northern Care Alliance, NHS Trust in Greater Manchester are doing some great work with Salford Council in this space, starting to direct its expenditure towards the local business base. We're also seeing some great work in Hywel Dda Health Board in Southwest Wales. But we're now kind of, you know, we're interested in the stretch target here, though, of course. So, and I think we're getting to the point within the NHS with consumables and stuff that's kind of currently routed through NHS supply chain, where actually practitioners are starting to think, well, hang on a minute, you know, we need to challenge the orthodoxy of this. We've got a climate crisis. You know, and also given the fact that we've got this huge source of economic demand that's created by our expenditure on these consumables, could we not use this to support local economic development? So why are we shipping in huge quantities of single-use consumables from overseas when the economic demand that's created by that could instead be channeled into the creation of local innovative markets? So, and again, as we recommend in the report, we need to see a new kind of local industrial strategy, essentially, in these spaces where the NHS works with local government to achieve this. But of course, we're going to need more flexibility here for the NHS around the use of its supply chain. And as we say, Department of Health, NHS England need to look at this and give ICSs more freedom in this space. In terms of the employment piece, you know, NHS councils, huge kind of numbers of jobs here. So it's about trying to target these towards people and communities who need these opportunities the most. Again, it's about NHS working in conjunction with the local authority, with the third sector, to connect those opportunities into appropriate pre-employment training. But within the NHS itself, it's about challenging some of those traditional ways of doing things. So maybe getting rid of advert and interview for certain positions and reserving those positions for the recipients of pre-employment training programs. And again, this is happening in practice. Northern Care Alliance are on with this. We're seeing the ICANN program in Birmingham that we flagged as an example in the report. And again, I urge you to have a look at that as well. And then with land, where feasible, you know, this should be about the kind of the partnership around, you know, the Integrated Care Board partnership, working together to say, right, you know, what surplus land have we got? You know, could we use this for affordable housing? You know, if the NHS has got land, could they contribute that? Could the local authority be the developer? You know, or could we transfer land into community ownership? But as with procurement, of course, you know, the NHS is constricted here by its centralised nature. NHS Property Services, again, have a lot of control over the usage and disposal of NHS land. And again, we need to see conversations at Department of Health, NHS England level to review this and think about how we can give the NHS more control over that land. So that's the kind of recommendations around spending, employment and land. There's also recommendations in there around how we socialise these ideas. Reports like this are useful. Well, I hope they're useful, you know, but I think translating knowledge, mobilizing knowledge into practice, of course, requires more. And it's why at CLES, we use community to practice as well as change agents on the ground. So we've got our community wealth builders in residence in the West Midlands who do a lot of this knitting work. And then, it's also why we've worked with Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes ICS on their own personalised action plan. This is a kind of a high level sketch that we provided here, but, of course, places need to work out and make sense of these interventions in their own context. But I think, creating space for the NHS to come together, to collaborate is a key. We've got our community of practice that we run. There's the Health Foundation, Anchor Action Learning Network, but we need more of this activity going forward. I mean, CLES, we'd be very happy to run our next community of practice meeting, digging into this question around how we can do this within the new ICS structure. So again, do get in touch if you're not currently part of our community of practice, and let's have a conversation how we can make our next meeting about that. In closing, I think, the final thing to say just before I hand over to Michael and get his reflections is that, many of the interventions, many of what we're talking about here is in this paper is based on the art of the possible. These things are happening in pockets already at the moment within the NHS. We just need the whole of the NHS to start to do these things, together and use all of these interventions, give them greater scale, give them greater strategic focus. In terms of impact, I know we all love impact. We want to know whether these things work or not. They are working. We're seeing that evidence coming through in our new NIHR study, which is demonstrating impact. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing people's reflections on this, particularly then on the scope that we've got within the new ICSs to do this. But equally, we know great work's going on in the health boards. In many ways, ICSs are kind of analogous to the kind of powers and control that health boards in Scotland and Wales have. So, it's a conversation that I think we can all have together. But yeah, thanks for listening. And I do really hope that you enjoy the paper and find it useful, and do get in touch if you'd like to talk more. But thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, and we absolutely do hope that papers like this are helpful. And hopefully you've been keeping an eye on the chat, and you'll see there's different links being put in related to the papers that Tom was mentioning. And your email address as well, I think, Tom. So, but definitely people would find that useful in terms of the next community of practice. Brilliant. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Tom. Fantastic and great to be here, everyone. Lovely to see you. My name is Michael Wood. I work for the NHS Confederation, which is a national membership body for NHS organisations. And my job is to link the health sector to the economy, and to go up and down the country talking about that anchor role that the NHS can play in partnership. And I've worked with Tom and the wider CLES team for many years now. So it's great to be here at the launch of another report. I'm sure there's been many reports between us we've published and spoken about each. And as well as that national role, I also have a London role, advising the NHS in London, specifically on that role in the capital. I've just got 5 minutes to respond to what Tom said, to unpick some of the messages which I've read in the briefing, and to think about, I guess, where this sits now in our, on our to-do list, in our strategy, in our perspective. And I think I'm going to lean on this report. I'm also going to lean on a report I published back in December on that fourth purpose, because I think there's so much complementarity, and I see them both as living documents, really. I think, we are still very much learning about this. We're in the foothills of really understanding what our influence and impact might look like. And so I think, I don't see these reports as sort of a one-stop shop. I see them as a part of that ongoing understanding. So 3 points, see if they make sense, Carolyn. I could talk about forever this, but I'm going to keep it very short and look forward to the discussion. I guess the first point that springs to mind is mindset when I think about this. And Tom's spoken to many leaders from in and outside the sector in this report. I spoke to many leaders too on a report in December. And I was really struck by the excitement and support for that fourth purpose you mentioned for an ICS, but also actually a bit of challenge that it's almost the acid test of whether something different happens in this reform. And those of us within the health sector, those of us outside the health sector, have experienced, for different perspectives, an awful lot of reforms in our sector. Will something truly be different this time? That fourth purpose is almost a test of it. And it's interesting, if I'm being simplistic, but those of us with a traditional NHS background see this as almost a fourth purpose of 4. We've, everything else is imbued in what we do. This is new. For those outside the NHS, that fourth purpose is the first one they look at. You know, it's the first one that leaves the 20% of what keeps us healthy and focuses on the place in which we live, we study, we work, you know, we live our lives. And I think that's something really, really important there. And there's been lots of I think there are some inherent challenges for the NHS in particular in this. And so that's what colleagues told me about. You know, the NHS needs to be more curious as part of this agenda. You know, we don't ask why things are how they are. And if we're not asking that, we're not understanding really what the solutions might look like. And we're also not understanding what the knock-on implications of our decision-making might be from a positive and a negative perspective. I think my favourite quote too was, the NHS sees the answer to every question as a service. You know, and I think, Tom, that goes back to something you were just saying there about we are continually trying to break that mindset, aren't we, in our ranker work? And I think we're doing really well about that. So, but on the flip side, I remember one ICB chief executive moved from an acute saying to me, this is the reason they came into public service in the first place. So there's an inherent power behind this purpose. And I think that's really important. Secondly, and I think I've been thinking that purpose. It feels to me such an important milestone in the continuation of the anchor journey, doesn't it? It almost feels like the next stage in that, really. And a few reasons why I said this, you know, and Tom, Carolyn, and I, as you said, we've been talking about this for several years now, and it's been wonderful and fascinating. You know, in a national job, seeing the local impact and the local intentional work about this is the best part of the job, isn't it? Really, you know, when you have a national job. But there's something about systems not assuming a role. You know, ICSs are new, they're statutory, but the anchor agenda of all of these is very much a bottom-up one. So in lots of my conversations with ICSs, it's about not starting from a point of view of we should automatically assume this is our role. It's about trying to understand where the added value comes from. And I think for me, there's something about part of that added value is the shift from an institutional perspective about what it is we can do to a more holistic understanding of the context in which those institutions operate. So for me, the question I want systems to be asking is, what is it we can change? What do we want to change that actually is difficult institutionally, but can be done, bringing that system of nexus of leaders and institutions together and actually understanding the context and what we want to do about to change the context and then reflecting that back to the institutions. I think that's a really interesting, clear system role. And some of your recommendations, Tom, refer to lobbying, experimenting, incentivizing. They are system roles, aren't they? They're not institutional roles as such, they're system roles. So that's where I think there's some really interesting added value can be found, particularly around the ICP bit of the jigsaw, that partnership. And that's really autonomy. That's what autonomy is there for, isn't it? Giving us autonomy, you know, we should be thinking how we use our autonomy. And those big ticket conversations are where I want to see conversations happening. And you spoke, Tom, about democratizing the economy. We also, let's be honest, I work in health policy. We need to democratize health policy. Systems should be thinking about their own policy. It shouldn't be someone in an ivory tower in London telling us what to do about that. And my final point, I think, builds on the partnership there, the ICP, and it builds on your recommendations actually about enterprise and the industrial strategy. Will we have another industrial strategy? What on, you know, where is it? Where is it at the moment? But there is something about understanding that local growth and devolution journey, which is rapidly speeding up and changing now, isn't it? And I go back to the transition from RDAs to local enterprise partnerships. Let's be honest, health as a concept wasn't really there, and the NHS as institutions certainly weren't there as part of that jigsaw then. Now actually we need to be involved in the new transition that's coming now. So what will replace local enterprise partnerships? How can we have health and the economy more closely intertwined? They're there. ICSs and the ICP, that partnership bit is absolutely the join, but the partnership bit has to have enterprise on it in a practical sense, and it has to have the link to enterprise on it in a strategic sense. And I think that's really important, to embed that health at the heart of economic development, which is what we're talking about today fundamentally. So there's an awful lot I could say. I'll leave it there, Carolyn, for now, but it's fantastic to have another report out which focuses on this, which highlights the big ticket issues, but also the practical steps we can take. And it's all of our jobs, isn't it, today, to try and progress this. So I'm looking forward to challenging questions.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Michael. So before we get to questions, and so just to encourage people actually, while we're speaking now, we've got some comments actually as well as questions in the Q&A box, which is also great. So yeah, just add your kind of reflections or any ideas actually that you'd like to share with people online. So if I just start off then for me, There's a couple of things really. I think particularly when you were talking about mindset, Michael, but I suppose in terms of my day job as well, in terms of really interested in the leadership practice. So how are we, particularly in system context, that you don't need to be in a leadership position to be in a position to practice leadership, really. And so actually all the things that we want to see here, if we wait for it to be done in a hierarchical way, in a kind of command and control way, we're going to be waiting for a very long time, aren't we? So this is something about people pushing the boundaries and maybe even stepping outside a bit, the boundaries of their authority into that leadership space, which can, feel really exciting and also slightly risky. So I think there's just reflections on that actually about the leadership approach to this, about where can people start and how do they translate it real in their context.
I think there's something really interesting, Carolyn, and I'll start then. Tom know that I have a view on this. There's something about the civic leadership space, isn't there? Which, I work in the NHS and I speak to NHS leaders up and down the country, and we have a range of leadership development courses in the NHS, huge range, some fantastic leadership development courses. And then when I ask people from chief exec, whatever part of of an institution, an NHS trust, what are you going to do when your library shuts? There's a pause. And there's a well, I don't know, that's not my job, is it? That's outside of my sphere of influence, is it? And there's something inherently holding us back, Carolyn. But from moving from an NHS leader to a system leader, we have to understand civic leadership is a core part of that. And the skills around leverage, patronage, working, one of the biggest things for the fourth purpose is actually it's joining existing conversations, not starting new ones. And that needs real humility, doesn't it? To understand what it is what tables are you not around? What do you not understand about the very place in which you operate and serve and work with communities? That's quite exposing, isn't it, from a leadership perspective? But so there is a real humility running through this, but it is really important we start opening up and understanding what's already happening in our place. And I think there's some brilliant examples of people doing that. I'll let Tom come in, but I think this will be a recurring theme, Carol, in this issue.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Michael. Tom.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of that. I mean, I think that, and it is about at the leadership level at the top. And, I think this is, this was working well in BLMK actually, is that, is the health partners, knowing that they're gonna learn a lot from local government here, is that, local government does have that responsibility for economic development and social and economic development as well. And that's always been the case. And there's kind of the strategies and plans and ideas around, what inclusive economies look like. We're seeing this much more in local government now. I suppose our interjection in this report around the strategic stuff was a kind of a reminder that this needs to be, these should be the bones of your strategy. But I think it's about health leaders working with local government there. And actually, Michael, when we were when I was talking to people here, I think there was that recognition from other health systems as well that look, we know that we're not just starting this debate. This debate and actions around this have been going on, as long as we've had local authorities. So I think there is that realization there. I think, Carolyn, to your point, I think there is leadership doesn't, all sorts of people can lead on this. And actually, I suppose that's why we've seen these pockets of really amazing practice occur already, is actually, and it's happening all of the time in our NHS community of practice. We're seeing it is people on the ground, practitioners actually just getting on and doing this stuff themselves, because they recognize the value in it, not just in terms of kind of helping the NHS meet its challenges, but genuinely in fulfilling that role as an anchor institution. So I think I think what we've got now, of course, is that opportunity to push on. And Michael, your point about where's the added value in this space? What can the NHS bring? I think that is where there needs to be that kind of careful sit down. And it is around the industrial strategy stuff, I think, because it's look, and the NHS doesn't need to do it on its own. It's those local economic development teams can really help with this. But it's about actually, hang on, we spend £6 billion a year as the NHS on consumables. That's an awful lot of economic demand that we're bringing to the table. All of those jobs that are quite, often them are quite, there's quite a, there's a lot of throughput in that. So there's a lot of opportunity those jobs. So I think and as I say, the land as well, it genuinely is those assets that could be brought into these kind of a new kind of economic development practice, I think.
Carolyn, can I just building on that? And there's something you mentioned, Carolyn, about hierarchies, you know, and I'm the antithesis of a hierarchy. I'm not sure quite how I would work in a hierarchy. It wouldn't work for all parties, I think. But there is something, isn't it, about people having that light bulb moment in this agenda. And it's not, you know, you can't just write it into a job description and expect it to be understood. You can't just put it into a corporate strategy. There's something about the power of what we're talking about. And that can be small in the first place. And one example that I always come back to, which can have big strategic change, is health on the high street. You know, there's empty shop fronts on our high streets which chip away your civic pride, and they reduce your economic and social you know, the potential of your place, and inhibit your children's futures, and they just drag you down. Well, why are we trying to house everything in a hospital? You know, why aren't we just experimenting? It doesn't have to be long term. Just move some services into the high street, go to communities actually, and improve your engagement, but also support that economic social viability. And the places that do that, the light bulb goes off, and you suddenly start thinking, why are we trying to develop a £3 billion hospital build? Actually, strategic estates planning should start with the high streets, and it should start with those. So there are, you know, there is small scale stuff which is experimental, which doesn't necessarily have to be led by a chief exec. And then there is translating that into the big ticket. Actually, we are addressing community engagement. We're supporting a new estate. We're really supporting our partners. There's an economic and social outcome of this. And actually, it really gets the people in the positions who want to deal with estates or procurement or workforce. They're bought into what we're trying to do, aren't they? Rather than just, you know, sort of a separate by itself, trying to come up with a master plan in isolation. So I think there are real pockets of that, but I want to see the light bulb moment going off.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. There's something as well for me about exactly the point that this is not a greenfield site, is it? This work, there's a lot already happening in places. I think it's true though for organisations that I've seen go on this journey that actually part of it is holding the mirror up to an organisation in a very different way. So you see yourselves differently, but actually part of that can also be seeing how much you are already doing in this space. So this is not, you know, it's not a deficit approach, is it? We could do more, but actually, usually there's already, because we're not as big, well, not just big public institutions, but we're not just in places, are we? We are of the places. Our workforce are of the places. We're physically in the place as well. So there are lots of connections already that we can definitely build on. And is that a way, Tom, particularly, well, Michael as well, that we've experienced the route in, that it can happen through small experimentation to start, or it can start from a strategic vision? It can kind of start anywhere, go everywhere, really, I suppose, is the question.
I think that's absolutely right, and that's what we are seeing, and many of the recommendations we make are about taking initial steps. I mean, there as I say, there's that non-NHS supply. Look, a new industrial strategy is going to be, you know, we're not going to do that overnight, right? But it's what we should be aiming at. But there is that kind of that's the non-NHS supply chain expenditure that, so Salford have basically, they've looked at their spend and they said, right, okay, this part of it is influenceable. And then they've given that over to local economic development teams in Salford Council. And now they're having a dialogue about how they can start to target more of that towards businesses. Again, with employment, you know, the simple step is like, well, analyze your workforce, like look at it and see, like, are you not employing people from areas of high deprivation? You know, and then it's about, well, what pre-employment support is there? What, you know, how can you work with the local authority to actually start to target those jobs? And again, these aren't necessarily things that, you know, cost money or divert huge amounts of resource. They often help with recruitment, and that's, I think, what places like the Northern Carolines have found is like, this is a way actually of addressing our recruitment needs as much as it is about addressing poverty, deprivation, and inequality. So those are some kind of quicker, easier ways, I think, in which you can start off with this, and that's where we've seen kind of practice move forward to date.
Yeah, and just on that, Michael, because there's definitely a sort of intersectionality of policy agendas, isn't there, with this work? So not only are you tackling your own workforce challenges, you know, and the work of Northern Carolines has been phenomenal in this space, but you're also diversifying your workforce. aren't you? Because you're recruiting from places you haven't traditionally recruited from. There's quite a lot that we haven't drawn it out particularly in this report, but what does a just transition look like for us in terms of carbon and sustainability? Well, you're reducing, you're impacting on that by looking at local supply chains and things, aren't you? So there's lots of interplays, aren't there, with different kind of agendas as well, which is definitely important, I think, in local context work.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. There's one, I often pitch this issue as it's almost, the challenge, first of all, to those of us in public policy writing strategies, particularly local strategies, do they pass the reality test? I've actually did it pass the test with the communities? Well, actually, these issues are what will help them pass that test. There's a realism to this. So we can talk strategically and we talk practically. And I think I like to be strategically opportunistic, to be perfectly honest, Carolyn, which is there are many touch points for the NHS with the local economy. Many, it is huge. That's fantastic. It's also quite daunting, isn't it? Which I think the question probably refers to. But there's also, I in my London job, what was interesting, we had a few buckets, and the first bucket was we're going to do something. And particularly around workforce, that was such an obvious one given our vacancies, the size of our workforce. So we didn't spend a long time strategically thinking what we should do. We should started doing something around living wage, around vaccination people into proper vocational, etc. And then the second bucket was about collaborating and supporting the mayor and his agenda in London. The third one was about supporting the systems. And straight away, all the NHS focus went into the delivery bucket, because that's what we're used to. We're going to do something. And over time, and we did some great stuff and some of the quick wins, which convinced others we were there, it was serious. But actually, the areas on which the mayor put his civic backing behind, and which united lots of other anchors, all of a sudden motored ahead. And actually, our colleagues for whom this was quite a new concept, that true relationship partnership, suddenly realized that actually we can go much further and faster together, uniting behind some strategic civic priorities, than we can putting our limited resource together into something. So, and then of course you learn about, support the systems, and actually you get the benefit. So there was a light bulb moment went off in the NHS in London, not just about what we should do, but how we do it, who we do it with, and where to invest our resources for the best outcomes, Carolyn. So yeah, absolutely right. We can start anywhere, we can go everywhere. That's a fantastic mantra. We know there'll be some classic areas like social value and workforce where we can make a real impact, but we also know there's some areas where our partners will be, if not already, they'll be leading and chomping at the bit, and actually just supporting them might get us much further down the road. But often we have to go through that, don't we, to understand the true meaning of partnership work.
Yeah, lovely. Good. So shall we move on to some of the questions then? Actually, there's been a bit of sort of chat actually, which is great to see as well, about SMEs. So, we obviously in the introduction, Tom, you were doing, what is an anchor institution, and we have focused on some of the, the bigger partners around that around the ICS, the ICB tables. But yeah, so reflections from both of you really about the role of SMEs. I mean, you did mention the triple bottom line of, grow and changing business models locally, but clearly there's an awful lot of SMEs already out there.
Yeah. No, I think that what we were trying to do in the report is, I suppose, is link to some of the progressive, and this is detailed, outlined in more detail in the report, is that what we're seeing now in some progressive local authorities is where they're thinking, and it relates to the industrial strategy point, is they're saying, right, let's actually bring our procurement activity into economic development. So we're saying, like, this is a proper mechanism that we're going to use to develop and grow our economy from within. And then as a consequence of that, particularly around the information that they've got around their business base because of giving out the COVID grants, it's like, well, we know a lot more about our businesses now. So we can actually start to do more of that matching in terms of like, right, we've got demand coming up, we've got a pipeline, we see some businesses over there, oh, they're kind of in that space with a bit of development, maybe they can start to provide those goods and services. But it's then saying to the SMEs, as a consequence of that, we need more from you. It can't just be about profit. You've got to think about, as I say, your triple bottom line. So are you living wage? Are you thinking about your responses to climate emergency too? So I think that's why SMEs are important in that space, because of course, like the majority of businesses out there are SMEs, you know, and there was a comment in there about social enterprises too, and kind of I know we didn't talk about them a lot in the report, but actually we do meet, well, obviously we want social enterprises to be part of this as well, but the reality is, of course, at the moment that there's not, you know, our economy isn't stacked full of social enterprises. That's a different question about how do we encourage other forms of ownership, and that could relate to some of this work, particularly around, well, what are economic development teams doing in local government to think about alternative forms of business support to encourage more of these organizations to come forward. But yeah, we would absolutely want to see that breadth of organization as part of those supply chains. But I think the obvious place to start is with SMEs, because that's what the majority of businesses are, but also handled in the right way with this kind of progressive local economic development practice. There's an opportunity to socialize them, I think, and make them more bottom line. Also to encourage about succession planning. Many businesses owners are reaching retirement age. Could we transition those businesses to worker ownership, to cooperatives? You know, there's that opportunity as well. But yeah, but that's why SMEs are important, I think, in this space.
Lovely. Michael, anything to add on that?
Just, I mean, we're seeing the links now between businesses and health are so clear, aren't you? Think about the labour market, the impact of, you know, the impact of ill health on. So I think if I'm a business leader now, I understand much more than maybe 5-10 years ago the impact, the value of health to my productivity, to my bottom line. I probably care about the place more than perhaps I did. You know, it's that, you know, businesses are talking about their civic and economic roles. And actually, I may even have switched during COVID to the NHS to be part of their supply chain, to stay afloat. You know, so there's a huge, I think the links are much greater. We do need, Tom's right, we do need a buffer, you know, and local government have a really important role there, don't they? To bring the, you know, the NHS in particular, that health arm into play. But I think now, I'd be amazed if there's not a huge shaded overlap in the Venn diagram between what a public service leader wants, a health leader wants, a business leader wants, and, you know, and the place is right at the heart of that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. There's a couple of questions, actually. They're different questions, but I think at the heart of it is about the kind of getting people in leadership positions or positions of power, positions of authority, actually decision making as barriers. So commissioning bodies, for example, within the NHS, you know, if there's a lack of understanding or interest, engagement in this kind of agenda, can be quite a significant barrier. There's another one about the targeting, you know, in the way we've been talking about recruitment from our areas of most significant deprivation, and how do you get people in, even if they're not on it, or, you know, program managing it directly, but creating the conditions where this kind of work can happen. Reflections on that, because we know it's so important, isn't it, for people to be able to take some risks and do some experimentation, but still thrive themselves in the roles.
I think that I suppose that is one of the opportunities within the new ICSs now is within those new commissioning structures, and the fact that there's commissioning there for preventative services, and it's all, you know, come together as in one kind of strategic conversation. And actually in BLMK we were having discussions there around, well, they were saying, well, maybe we could commission kind of community development workers through our commissioning arm to do some of that kind of economic knitting on the ground. You know, I know that in Bedford, in Birmingham Solihull ICS, they're thinking, well, you know, yeah, how might we be able to use the kind of the commissioning function there to support the kind of the ICAM program? There's those kind of conversations going on. So I think this change in the commission structure is bringing those conversations to the forefront more. So I think, yeah, as it's starting to happen there, whether that happens elsewhere and how we encourage it more. Yeah, Michael, let me bring you in.
And there's a question about the ICP too in there, which I think is a really important part of this, isn't it? And I come back to that point about the value of a system and the democratizing policy, because systems should be able to not only identify the problems, that's often the challenge, isn't it? Institutions can identify the problems, the barriers, but often they cannot address them in any systemic way. They can get around it on an episodic fashion, but whereas a system should be able to marry the names and the numbers and, you know, the macro and the micro, and say, actually, if there's a huge problem to employing people from communities that actually traditionally do not use our services and that we don't understand, well, why are we using NHS jobs for every single job in the NHS? What, you know, I want system leaders to be experimenting and challenging and advocating upwards why something needs to change and actually working on what the changes could be. I think between us on this call, I'm sure people could write in the chat function, we'd have lots of barriers would come up. It can't be just for NHS England to remove all, to understand what those barriers are. The closer to the ground you are, the more you understand. The systems give you the understanding, but matched with hopefully a scale and an appetite and an ambition and hopefully the teeth to do something about it. And that's where the ICP comes in. I want to see ICPs which are strong and vocal. They don't need a lot of resource, I don't think, but they need, you know, they need that, for that phrase, skin in the game, don't they? They need some, you know, they need teeth to try and articulate what the role of an ICS should be, and to look at tomorrow, not just today. So the more, I think it's in all our interests on this call and the people joining us today to fight for an ICP that's broad, that's got real teeth and energy, and that can chart a path to tomorrow, and that can drag the rest of the system to get there. I think that's a critical part of the new reforms.
Yeah. And it is reading it, isn't it? With the reading all these things, legislation, the guidance that follows or whatever, with the eye to what does that make possible, really, you know, rather than explicitly looking for the direction. So I've mentioned there's a lot of support, Michael, for your health on high street. There's a lot of love for that idea on the call. I use that kind of, it's one of Myron Rogers' phrases, start anywhere, go everywhere, whatever. But where would you start, actually? Because there's also quite a lot about, wow, this is exciting. It's, you know, but it's also huge. So where would you start? I mean, there's obviously some guides in the report, but we've got the kind of 6 themes. So if you wanted to build a movement within your own organisation for this kind of work, get people on to support, what would your advice be about the starting point?
I mean, Tom and I have both done this, and if I go first, then Tom, I'll pass to you. I think there's something about an ask and an offer, isn't there, in all of this? And sometimes I was speaking to a chief executive of NHS Trust recently who said we've sort of lost the deal making art in the NHS. You know, we're giving our money. You know, we haven't had to go out and advocate and fight for actually what we want to do. So so there's an ask and an offer, and there is something. First of all, how much do we know about ourselves? I mean, Tom's like, do we know where our staff live? How many live in the most deprived parts? Who are they? You know, do we know where we're spending our money? What, you know, and where we're not spending our money? What, you know, do we know where our estate is and what use it's in and how we're using? So there's an awful lot we can do just by actually looking at the data within our system, which will help us. It'll not only tell us a bit of the story, it'll tell us a bit of the story. Actually, then you'll probably think, wow, we are really, you know, we are making, and the worry is we're making place blind decisions while sitting on huge economic and social agency. That's the worry, isn't it? So we need to challenge that distinction. And then there's something about, you're right, we know workforce is a shared priority. We know, you know, procurement is a shared priority. We know there is something about estates, which is a shared priority. And there's something about experimenting and trying, and you know, who in the, you know, is there a local regeneration site that the council's leading on? Is there a hospital rebuild happening? Is there some, you know, between us, we can come up with the 5 broad areas on which I can guarantee you can have impact, and there's something you can do in the short term. But you're then looking for those opportunities that actually may be outside our sector to hook into. You know, local regen could be, you know, read the local, often it's local paper where you find out about what's happening in your town centre and you think, well, why isn't the NHS involved in that regeneration? Yeah. You know.
But I think and on that, and on the health on the high street thing, I think that again, that is the beauty of these partnerships, is because they enable these conversations to take place. So like in Wales, where you've got the health board structure there, which again is kind of analogous to kind of what ICSs are as entities. you've seen the NHS, they're working with the councils. So the councils use levelling up fund money to buy an old Debenhams. They're then working with the health board to move those health services onto the high street. And then that's kind of creating footfall in that area so that other businesses are able to spring up. Again, I had those conversations with BLMK actually, is that they again are thinking about, well, you know, how do we commission new kinds of health services that we can route in different places? And I suppose, yeah, by bringing those partners together, you know, you're able to kind of see those opportunities more clearly. And then, you know, I think hopefully we can have faith in the system that these conversations will start to take place, because it's putting the building blocks in places. It's happening in Warrington are doing something similar as well. They're trying to commission and shift services to put them into kind of, you know, non-typical areas. So I think we'll see that start to emerge more as services come up to be recommissioned. It's like, oh, well, maybe we can bring that together with, you know, something that's providing adult social care, you know, you've got the council services all in one spot. Oh, let's put that on the high street, as we're saying. I think, again, I'm seeing those kinds of conversations starting to emerge. I certainly saw them, you know, in the research that we've done here. So I think that will start to happen.
And Tom, just on that, Carolyn, just picking on that point, it's really interesting. Some of the discussions I'm seeing, it's not about the NHS lozenge. You know, actually, it's actually taking that. Well, actually, it's about almost addressing the power imbalance, you know, of clinical versus other citizens. And actually, it's about co-locating with other services, building those services into actually our commissioning streams, understanding that actually people don't want a big blue lozenge on the front of the building. Actually, they want to go and receive mental health or primary care or other services in other settings. So I think that's the barriers, aren't they? The walls we're breaking down, aren't we? And I think that's a real positive for me. And health is a commercial opportunity for businesses, isn't it? You know, and there'll be various different elements of health consumerism, which are probably going to pop up on the high street now.
Yeah, no, so it's fascinating, isn't it? How much energy sometimes goes on in organisations, sort of boundary policing. We're this, and this is what we do. We don't blur, and we want much more permeable boundaries, don't we? To say, actually, yes, you do, but you're also in a place. I mean, I loved your phrase about making place-blind decisions. There's a comment in the Q&A actually about how the risk of kind of, you know, bigger and bigger trusts, or people coming together and scaling up, makes place-blind decisions more likely. And actually, I know certainly we've seen that with multi-academy trusts, where, you know, you're in a bigger group, and so you're not a school just locally, you're part of a wider network. And I think the skill in looking both ways becomes a really important one, probably linked to your point, Tom, about the data and the information that we have, but also linked to the comment there about how do we support leaders, and I don't just mean hierarchy there, but leaders in the broadest sense, to do this work under the pressure they're in, to be able to look both ways, to do that kind of translation between the purpose of the institution, but the relationship and impact on place. Because it's a skill, isn't it? It's a way of framing, it's a way of seeing the world, making sense of the world, and delivering kind of impact.
I think there's some of those tools that we mentioned. I think the communities of practice type models are really important for that, where you know, certainly we've seen they've been really effective. I think, you know, as we've used them in CLES to help spread ideas that kind of provide a trust level. You know, I'm wondering whether there's the need for something like that, a leadership, you know, or kind of an action learning type forum for people to come together and to kind of share challenges and opportunities. You know, the evidence will suggest that those kind of interventions are really key when it comes to mobilizing knowledge. So, you know, there's a question, of course, how we resource that. Is it something that could be resourced collectively by the ICSs? You know, is it something that needs to come from NHS England? These are all questions in the mix, but I think just having that space to kind of address these challenges and opportunities in concert rather than as, you know, a series of individual ICSs is really important and fundamental.
And the last thing I'll say, Carolyn, just on that point before you wrap it, is I'm always a bit wary of when we get presented with a slide which is wonderfully clear about this will happen at that level, that will happen at that. And I think, well, that's not real life, is it? Real life is messy. So who within your system is going to walk the back streets and going to sit in that system table? And who is going to, where is the echo? Right from the, you know, the very wards in which we live and work, right up to the big tables we sit around. Because it's not a case that this happens there, that happens there, that happens there. That's just not real to me. So I think bringing our leaders in and our partners and understanding who within our systems can do that, you know, and be a part of all the different discussions. That's exciting, isn't it? And I think it's turning that, you know, turning it on its head, and you can do things locally, which you can't do nationally. And that, again, should be why we came into public service in the first place.
Definitely, that point of subsidiarity is so important, isn't it? I'm just going to break the format and the rules of these kind of things and actually bring somebody from the audience in. Edna Robinson, put your hand up, and we've got a few minutes left. So you wanted to make a contribution, I think, on this point.
Oh, hi, Carolyn. Thanks.
Hi.
Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. It's been really interesting. We've set up an Alternative Provider Federation in Greater Manchester at the inception of the new ICS system, which is representing the social businesses, many of whom are mainstream NHS providers with mainstream NHS contracts. And I think the conversation, so there's 2 points I wanted to make. One is that I think their physical capital in terms of their assets in communities need to be taken into consideration. There are many buildings and facilities that we're referring to, which actually are not characterised as NHS assets. And in fact, they're not owned by the NHS, but they provide a massive economic place where other things could be happening. And so I think, you know, there tends to be an NHS trust-centric conversation about the NHS rather than NHS providers who are many and varied. So, and I mean, the obvious examples are people on the high street anyway, like pharmacists, etc. But I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about people with major community assets. So that's one thing. And the final thing I just wanted to say was around foundation trusts, and the governors and the membership of foundation trusts are a different community completely from the leadership of the boards. And I haven't heard them mentioned. And as a former foundation trust chair, I feel very strongly that we should be talking about the population of that foundation trust and what it would like to see its foundation trust becoming. So we're talking about leadership in terms of paid leadership, but there is very strong community leadership in foundation trusts, and it often doesn't get heard. So I just wanted to bring them into the room. So thanks for your time, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, Edna. And that's such an important point, isn't it, about leadership everywhere, not employed. So when I was sort of saying at the beginning, every resource we've got, that exactly that kind of issue. But yeah, nice point actually about NHS providers, not just about, you know, the hospitals as kind of anchor. So I'm conscious of time, so I just in the last couple of minutes to thank everybody. Thank you for people. Sorry if I didn't get to your question, and apologies for the license I took with some of them as well in terms of trying to pick the key points as I saw them, so that we picked a couple of up at a time. Hopefully there's still the points that you were interested in were still addressed. Huge thank you, Michael. Huge thank you, Tom. I do urge people, if you haven't had a chance to actually read the report in full, and I suspect you haven't because you've all got very busy lives, do so. But as much as that, using all these documents and things as springboards to action. So the community of practice that Tom mentioned, we'd love to expand that, you know, and have these kind of conversations about how do we translate these ideas and great practice that's already happening in some places to even more action in even more places is the goal, really. So thanks very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful, and really look forward to the continuing conversation. Have a great rest of the day, rest of the week. Take care. Oh, and enjoy the bank holiday, those of you that are having it. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.